Okay. On today's Food for Thought, it's a privilege to welcome back Dr. John Demartini, a best-selling author who's written over 40 books, an international speaker, running an almost permanent schedule of workshops. He has a travelling schedule that actually makes mine look like a lightweight, in all honesty. Thank you for again joining me, John, today.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Now, we're going to talk today about the mind-body connection and how our health and life experiences image our thoughts. Previously quite a disputed area between science, medicine, spiritual and the alternative health field for quite a long time. But that's now changing, isn't it? Because there's large swathes of research starting to back up alternative practices and religious practices. Power of prayer, mindfulness, meditation, gratitude, etc., etc. It's hard for them to ignore now, isn't it?
Well, unquestionably, sometimes great ideas take a whole generation at least to become part of the landscape. And pioneers who knew about things in advance, who spoke up, were ridiculed and sometimes violently opposed until they became self-evident as the research caught up with them. Mm-hmm. And this is what's happening because unquestionably with the understanding of neuroplasticity, epigenetics, and these types of topics, and the power of our mind being equilibrated and bring about healing in the body. There's no doubt that the research is now finally supporting what some have intuitively known and observed clinically.
It's interesting when you talk about intuitively known, because I do think that our intuition is very much ignored. Our experience is ignored, particularly with medicine, and it's been very much overridden until just recently.
Well, there's a value to the empirical studies, but there's something more than just the senses. Many philosophers throughout the ages have acknowledged that there are sensory realities, but there's definitely things that go beyond the senses, and our senses are very much distorted, and even our memory components are distorted by emotions. So if we go purely by subjective biased research, we miss out on some of the things that our intuition is trying to integrate and reveal to us that our transcendent mind has the capacity to bring wellness to. So I think that we need science, but we also need the pioneers that are at the cutting edge of science.
I found it really interesting a few years ago when I read about the Navy SEALs and how they were actually being taught as part of their training. This was a long time ago, that they were taught to actually listen to their body in regards to if there was fear. So if they were going into an environment, that actually they were to listen to how their body was reacting so that they would know whether it was safe or not.
Well, our perceptions affect physiology, and our perceptions affect our physiology, and it lets us know what our unconscious and conscious is about to say. And many people have tuned out the unconscious, but the unconscious and the conscious, when integrated, make up a full conscious awareness that most people they're not conscious of, they're not seeing. And a lot of our illnesses are because of repressions of unconscious data. And so if we get present and mindful, we're able to sometimes access this information and put together a puzzle into our awareness that allows us to bring not only wellness, but full potential.
Why do you think we've tuned out the unconscious?
Well, because of the models. It was Jeremy Bentham who created a utilitarian hedonistic model for moral development, and they tried to impose it on society to try to be a one-sided person, trying to be only one side instead of embracing both sides of our life. So what we did is attempting to be a one-sided person. We deleted out the other part of our awareness, and we split ourselves up. And today we're looking at holistic and integrative types of approaches and reawakening that part that we shut out.
That's really fascinating, because I just feel that has had such a profound effect not only on individuals but on society as a whole and culture as a whole.
Well, I'm amazed that, if you're highly infatuated, let's say you're a young man or young woman and you're looking for a mate, and you meet somebody and you're highly infatuated with them, and really admiring and really looking up to, and when you do, you tend to sacrifice what's important to you temporarily to be with them. You're blind and ignorant of the downsides. You're assuming that there's all upsides. And then as you start to date them, weeks or months or maybe years, you discover the other side, the side that you didn't anticipate, you didn't expect. And all of a sudden you realize that, oh, they got things I like and dislike, support and challenge, things similar and different, and eventually come to know the person over time. But you were ignorant when you first met them, and you're infatuated and blind to those other sides. And that other side is the unconscious. The same thing when we resent people, we get blind to the upsides. And these blindnesses don't allow us to see the whole thing. And when we see the whole, we feel grateful and we feel love and we bring wellness. But when we see one or the other, we create emotions and we create illness. So our job is to get past our initial blindness and see things that are, and see things that are actual instead of just things that we realize through limited senses.
Do you feel that our media actually has a part to play in this because of how it actually portrays emotions, almost heightened emotions and very specific emotions in certain ways, very sexualized and things like this on our televisions and in our films and things?
Absolutely. They tend to make things black and white instead of gray. They tend to polarize things instead of synthesize things. And they tend to be into sensationalism instead of facts. And I've seen it. I've been doing media. I've done thousands of media interviews. And I'm amazed sometimes of the distortions that are put out there. I can take and do a presentation or interview, and they can take only parts of it and put out what they want and then lead it in the direction that they want sometimes. Not all, but many mediums do this. So yes, sensationalism sells, and the facts sometimes don't. As one proverb said, that by the time the truth puts on its shoes, fantasies are spread across the world.
That approach, though, is one ultimately altering our whole culture, our thinking and our perception, not only of people, but also how we interact with people, though, isn't it?
Yeah, we project our values onto others, expect them to live in our life values, and they expect the same, and so we're basically a bunch of us projecting values and filtering things instead of actually looking what's actually there and looking what people are really up to. And we sometimes, as a result of it, create emotions. They create symptoms to try to act as a feedback in our physiology to try to guide us to see things whole. I really believe that the symptoms of our body are feedback mechanisms to guide us back to wholeness. Can I share something with you? I'm amazed that, if somebody goes out and eats a pizza, and then afterwards a steak, and after that a cheesecake, and after that a big bowl of spaghetti, and then after that a jar of peanut butter, and they just pig out and gorge and just overeat. And they wake up the next morning with a snuffy nose, headache, eyes are irritated, gut that's cramped, diarrhea, bloat, cramps, etc., and oily skin. If they go to some doctors, they'll give them an anti-acid, an antihistamine, an anti-flatulent, an antivirus, an anti-headache, and an analgesic, an diuretic, and anti-everything. And then if you go to a naturopath or chiropractor, they'll say, hey, you pigged out last night. That your body's creating symptoms to let you know that not to eat that way. So one person sees it as disease to get rid of all the symptoms and try to make you feel only one-sided, and the other is trying to help you see that your body is doing its part and actually guiding you to living wisely and more moderately. And so it's our whole nature is look for the pill for every ill and the quick fix. But I don't think we have an excess of organs and a deficiency of drugs in the world. I think what we have is the lack of listening to our own physiology and learning how the wisdom of the body speaks to us. We're missing out on it.
I found it really interesting just recently. Becca Levy from is a professor at Yale. They conducted some research stating that the negative thoughts and aging were actually leading to potentially Alzheimer's and are actually creating effectively the plaques and tangles because they were almost programming those people in advance. Therefore, they were having a different viewpoint on the thinking aspect of things, so seeing it more holistically.
Well, there's no doubt that our thoughts and our emotions and our feelings impact our physiology. And I was amazed when I was in 38 years ago, I was the head of the Cancer Prevention Control Association in Houston, Texas. And, we were doing programs trying to educate patients that had cancer on alternative things that they could do in addition to their chemotherapy, radiation therapy, and surgery. And a lot of them were sent home to die, their terminal patients. And we changed their diet. We changed their attitude. We changed their communication with people. We started changing their lifestyle. And a lot of these people lived on. And I was always amazed at how that was being overlooked by the healthcare professions because it just didn't match their model of reality. But all of a sudden, I realized that we have way more power that inside than most people realize, and we're not harnessing that. And that's why I'm so much involved in it. I mean, for the last 43 years, I've been involved in the inner healing. I always say that, the real healer is within. And I think that we just haven't maximized the potential of it with our attitude, our diet, and our lifestyle.
Well, they were actually expressing in that research about the fact that it had to be self-empowerment, Dan. You have to take responsibility for your own health. You have to understand that actually aging isn't a disease, a bit like menopause isn't a disease, and actually see that these are processes the body goes through. But ultimately, you can have profound effects on them in a multitude of ways.
Absolutely. If you're not doing what you love and not inspired by your life, what they found is that every human being lives by a set of priorities, and whenever they're living congruently in alignment with their highest values, and they're inspired, and they can't wait to get up in the morning and do what they love to do, and they set goals that are really, really meaningful to them, they have an increasing probably achievement. They expand their space and time horizons in their vision. They tend to have more congruency. Their physiology tends to rally, and they tend to live a longer life. But people that are injecting the values of others and trying to be somebody they're not and banging their head against the wall and limping their life, not walking or talk, these individuals shorten their telomeres and shorten their cell functions and basically end up dying soon. So it's important to have a mission to live for, something that inspires you, something you love doing, and doing it with the people you love to help add years to life and life to years.
So ultimately, Brian Ferry was right. Love is the drug.
Absolutely. We definitely have the greatest pharmaceutical company is not on the outside, it's on the inside. And when we're living an inspired life, that pharmaceutical company knows what to do and what chemistries to bring to what cells.
I was told a great story. I don't actually know whether it's true or not, but by one of my tutors many years ago, who actually talks about Deepak Chopra, and he was asked whether he wanted a drink on an airplane, and actually said, "No, I'm making it myself." And I thought it was an absolutely brilliant quote.
Well, I think that's so. Deepak's a brilliant guy. He's been ahead of the field for a long time, and we had the opportunity to do some programs together over the years, and you can learn something from the man. He's a very sharp guy.
So the other thing is that other people can have profound effects on your thinking and your environment as well, can't they? Because it's shown in research that the interaction with your doctor can actually have a profound effect, and they can actually change your prognosis ultimately. The people around you can have a profound effect, your environment as well.
Absolutely. I worked with a gentleman who specializes in male prostate cancers, and he was an oncologist. And he said, "You know what I do? I have fun with people's minds." And I said, "What do you do?" He says every time they come in and they say, "Well, there's absolutely destitute because they went to a hospital and they diagnosed him with upper stage cancer." He said, "Absolutely not. We'll solve this." And he had this attitude that was like that made people relax and said, "Well, let's work together. We need to change some things in your life. We need to do some things here and that." And because they were relieved to know that somebody cared and somebody was focused, he had the greatest results over the average person that just went the average route and ended up dying sooner or later. And a lot of these prostate cancers were things that were self-limiting, and they would take years. People would never die of the disease. They'd die from the psychology of thinking they're going to die of the disease.
Back in 1937, Napoleon Hill said, "Whatever the mind can conceive and believe it can achieve."
Exactly.
As a practitioner, I believe that 90% of health is in the mind, and a lot of my clients, at first I found it really bizarre when people kept coming back, and they wanted to come back between the sessions that I'd organised. And they said, "No, I need to come back to see you." And I think what they were getting from me was that whole positive focus and the ability for them to just talk and be far more open. So whereas at first I was very focused on, what they should or shouldn't eat, because that's obviously my main field, actually what it became was what they should or shouldn't think. And how could we shift?
I always say that what goes into the food for thought and what goes into the food for body, both of them impact our psychology and our body. And we have to moderate one. But it's been shown that people who are living by something that inspires them and they're meaningful to them, and they feel fulfillment, they tend to stay in the executive center of the brain, which is inspired, vision-oriented, strategic planning-oriented, self-governance-oriented. And when they do, they're less likely to go into overconsumption, overeating, oversugar, oversalt, over-dietary excessives. So if they basically moderate their body and physiology the second they're doing something meaningful. This is why it's so important to have a meaningful path in life, a meaningful career, a meaningful relationship. All of them help you moderate and bring yourself into homeostasis.
Yes, so many people aren't.
Well, that's I found it. I teach the Breakthrough Experience, my signature program, which I'm doing this weekend, and I dedicate helping people find what that most meaningful path for them is and structure their life around priorities. So if you get up in the morning and you fill your day with high priority actions that inspire you, it doesn't fill up with low priority distractions that don't, and you have more inspiration instead of desperation. Those people, they eat differently, they think differently, they plan their life differently, they rally in their physiology, and they start to live a more fulfilled life, and they live longer by doing that. So there's no doubt in my mind that our psychology and our physiology is impacting how long we live and what we decide to get out of life.
I think we're schooling children, though, into careers that often they don't want to be in. I ran a workshop a few years ago when I was doing a different career, and it was in career transition because these people were about to lose their jobs, and ultimately we ran a series of questions, which was what did they want to be when they were a child, what were their dreams and things like this, to kind of get them hooked back in to those things. And most people were now working in administration and absolutely loathe their jobs. Why does somebody go from having these dreams to actually having them so unfulfilled, do you think?
Well, as Freud said, when a child gets to be a certain age, they tend to subordinate their natural desires to fit into society. They called it socialization, but what it is it's an injection of other people's values and a conflict within themselves. And that's the beginning of basically a repression of who we are. Mm. And then we start doubting our capacities because we depend on these people that have been injecting the values, and we're frightened to lose them as guidance, and so we end up trying to suppress ourselves. But we have to break through. As Kohlberg says, most people subordinate to individual or collective authorities instead of transcend them and live authentically. And it's the breaking through and living authentically that liberates us and allows us to live a longer and more fulfilling life.
Which can often go against what those people around you are actually saying.
Well, if you're not doing something that pisses people off, you're probably not being true to yourself. I call it the law of lesser pissers.
Yeah, I think
I learned a long time ago. I was told by many people on the journey, you should do this, you should do that, and everybody's projecting their values on you according to what they think will make them fulfilled. But you have to be able to say thank you, but no thank you, not try to scatter yourself. You'll end up with chronic fatigue syndrome trying to scatter yourself, pleasing everybody. You have to be able to prioritize your life and do something meaningful that inspires you, that also serves other people, and then master the art of communicating what you're dedicated to in terms of other people's values, so everyone wins in that process.
Now, you referred to the epigenetic side. I don't think we're going to have time to go into the neuroplasticity, but the epigenetic side of actually, how it affects the genetic picture and therefore our health can be quite profound as a game changer, can't it?
Well, unquestionably, I was very interested in epigenetics back before epigenetics was even used as a term, hardly, back about 30, 40 years ago. And I've been watching the evolution of it, and it's mainstream today, but back then it was just articles. And what's interesting is that as we perceive things as support or challenge our values, we activate the autonomic, parasympathetic, and sympathetic nervous systems, which change chemistry, which change receptor sites, which change enzyme pathways, which change what they call methylation or acetylation, or acetylation methylation, which changes the codes of expression in the genes. So we literally can turn on and turn off genes with our perceptions and how we feel. So what was once set in genes and said that's just purely nature's way, we now realize that our nurturing perceptions can alter nature's way. And we have the capacity to alter which genes are turned on and turned off. And a lot of the diseases that were once thought purely genetic are now realizing that our psychology and behavior and environment is impacting it.
Now that puts a big question on some of the practices that medicine is actually following at the moment in regards to when they're getting gene expression and they're doing genetic expression tests, and ultimately they're coming back and making decisions to remove parts of the body.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is we now know that we can duplicate, we can delete, we can transpose, we can turn on and turn off genetic elements by perception. And our belief and our perceptions are impacting our cell walls and impacting our nuclear components. Our little chromosomes and our chromatids and all the components, the proteins that are being manufactured, are actually being turned on and turned off by our thoughts. So epigenetics is playing a major role in the disease process or illness process, and I really believe that it's a feedback to try to guide us to be authentic, to be whole, to see things and love things and appreciate things so we can maximize our life.
Do you think we're predisposing ourselves to illness via listening to sometimes our parents who say, oh, I've got a thyroid issue, so you're going to get it?
Well, there's sometimes we've got genetics information, but they found out that even epigenetics can pass from one generation to the other. So if a person believes that they're going to have a heart attack in their 40s or 50s, like their grandparents and their parents did, well, then they're increasing their probabilities. But that it's been shown that epigenetic tags can be passed from one generation, 2 generations down. So it's wise to be able to break those tags with a new attitude, a new perception. Because I had a gentleman it was interesting in Toronto. I had a gentleman who was told that he had 3 generations of heart attack, and they weren't living past 60. And so he was preparing to die. He said, well, it's in grandparent, my father, they all died before 60, so I guess I'm going to live to 60. So he was preparing for his death. God, for 10 years he was preparing for those days, making sure his kids were independent, making this and that. And I sat with him, I said, just because they did doesn't mean you have to do that. That's just bullshit. And I confronted him. And anyway, he's 66 now. He's 66. Now, I don't know if it's just because of what I said. He just may have just lived longer. But the reality is he was preparing for death. Mm. And his wife was concerned. His son was concerned. And that's why they asked me to consult with him to try to break that assumption, that pattern that was sitting there. And so he's 66. So all I know is that he's gone literally 8 years since we've met, and he's still 8 years into it. And I have a feeling he's going to probably make it to 80 the way he's going.
Well, one study showed that 79% of medical students report developing the symptoms suggestive of the illness that they're studying.
Oh, whenever you're in professional school, all the symptoms when you read abnormal psychology, you know you're abnormal. When you read pathology, you start thinking you have the symptoms. Yeah, it adds to the equation. Your innermost dominant thought becomes your outermost tangible reality. You think about those conditions, you start having anxieties about them.
So, and what's fascinating for me is that they are researching the placebo effect, so they'll be being taught about that as well.
Well, there's a placebo and a nocebo effect, and both pleasure or pain and kind of a different types of attitude can definitely lead to those outcomes. So if you believe that it's doomsday or zoomsday, you impact your physiology.
So the final part of this interview, I'd like to understand, how can we take command of thoughts that are habitual, that people have practiced for such a long time, that actually they find very difficult to move out of? Where do people start?
Well, the wisest thing to do is not try to get rid of any trait, but to fill your day with traits that work. If you fill your day with high-priority actions that have proven to work, you automatically fade out and remyelinate the brain to do those activities, and the other ones fade out, start diminishing. Trying to get rid of something without replacing it with something that's meaningful will not get you anywhere. But filling your day with high-priority actions that are most meaningful, that are really congruent with your highest values, that you love doing, that impacts it. And the same thing, prioritizing your diet and prioritizing the people you associate with and prioritizing your thoughts. Anytime you prioritize and fill your day with high-priority actions, perceptions, and decisions, you go farther in life than if you don't. So this is the thing to change it, is to focus on what works instead of not what's not working. Now,
these priorities, people often, I find with my clients, and it's predominantly female client base that I tend to have, that they prioritize everything in front of them. And I call it they have a to-do list when they start, and then they have a to-love list when they start working with me, because I want them to start to work on what they actually love doing and prioritize them instead. But
exactly.
They really find it difficult to actually prioritize themselves first.
Well, they're so used to pleasing people on the outside, they feel they should be doing this, they ought to be doing it. They're living by imperatives instead of indicatives. And start with what you know and let what you know grow, I tell people. Start with what you know you'd love to dedicate your life to and what's inspiring to you, and start filling your day with things that are meaningful. And that's how you build a love list. And it's not about what other people think. It's your life. At the end of your life, you're going to be looking back and you're going to deal with Bonnie Ware's regrets. And if you're not living your life to the fullest and in what's inspiring to you. So look at what really is meaningful and start filling it with little incremental daily actions that help you grow your life. Mary Kay from Mary Kay Cosmetic taught me that 30 years ago, and it changed my life, and I've basically been doing it ever since. And I fill my day with the highest priority actions each day, which is, for me, researching, writing, traveling, and teaching, and doing what my mission is.
Now, the biggest pushback I get on that is how guilty they feel.
Well, you only feel guilty when you're comparing your actions to what you expect other people want from you. So in other words, if you think that that somebody says, you should be doing this, you ought to be doing that, and you buy into that, and you give them authority, then you're going to beat yourself up because you're trying to live outside your own values. But what happens is the people that are upset and throw guilt trips at you, if they see that you stick to your guns and you go and achieve great things, they eventually humble themselves and appreciate and honor you for sticking your guns, and they respect you more and value you more because you're valuing you more.
That's really interesting. Now, talk a little bit about values, because often they don't understand how those are driving their decision-making.
Well, every decision you make is based on what you believe will give you the greatest advantage or disadvantage to your highest value. Your highest value is what your life demonstrates is most important to you, what you value most, what's most meaningful. In my life, it's researching and writing and traveling and teaching. But different people have different values. Some are into spirituality, some into physical fitness, some into intellectual pursuits, some into careers, some into wealth building, some into social causes, some into physical fitness. Everybody's got a different value system, and whatever's most meaningful to them, what's most important to them, that's what they are wise to put their priorities on. If they do, they grow in self-worth, and they increase the capacities, and they expand their awareness, and they achieve more. If they don't, and they try to live by everybody else's, they'll shrink instead of shine. They'll live in the shadows of people instead of on the shoulders of giants.
A final word from you, John, in regards to tell us about the workshops that you're running this weekend.
Well, this weekend I'm doing the Breakthrough Experience. First I'm speaking at the Blue Cow Summit on Friday, and then I'm doing the weekend experience, the Breakthrough Experience. I've been doing that now for it's going on 28th year. I love it. I've been doing it about 40 times a year for 28 years. I've done 1,059 programs of it. And, I just love sharing it because it's about helping people break through whatever's in the way and show how everything is on the way. And so they can get on and do something extraordinary with their life. Because I believe that people want to make a difference, and the Breakthrough Program is about how to maximize that difference you want to make and get clear about it and get strategized and get it in motion. And then I'm here doing Master Planning for Life on the weekend, on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and that's about taking command of how you want your life and planning it out. Because if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. You're not taking command of your life, and everybody else is going to inject their life into your life instead of you being in there. So master planning is for people that want to master their lives and take command.
Dr. John Demartini, thank you so much for coming on Food for Thought and Natural Health Radio. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's fun having fun with chatting because you're alive, you're vibrant, and you're fun.
Perfect.